Welcome aboard all. This week's special guest is Speed Muller, who's one of the awesome foursome of the NMRA-X. We chat about all things NMRA-X, his Wi-Fi signalling, which is very interesting, and remote ops, which, as I've said the last two interviews, is the most exciting thing since the inception of DCC. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dazzy J from Model Railroad Techniques. Our YouTube channel produces video podcasts which showcase bottlers from all around the world. Also a few how-to videos in there for a good mix. If you know someone that might fit the bill for the channel, make sure they reach out and email me. The link is below. Make sure you subscribe, like, and comment on the videos. Also have a Patreon page. Every little bit helps to keep the content rolling. So without further ado, let's get started. Little public service announcement here. Make sure you vote one for Gordy Robinson in the upcoming NMRA elections. I believe personally he has brought this hobby into the 21st century with such initiatives as the NMRA-X virtual clinics and the like. So make sure you vote for Gordy. Welcome aboard, Speed Muller from Texas in the United States. You can be found on a lot of different places here. You've got Facebook at TXNAMIB, and I'll put all the links below to all these. You've also got a blog for Arduino. You've also got a website, TXNAMIB.com. You're a member of what I'm calling the awesome foursome for NMRX with Gordy, Brad, and Marty Jenkins out of here in Australia. So, can you sort of explain what else are you doing in this space regarding NMRX? Because it's quite an exciting thing that's going online right now, I believe.
Well, so good evening all. I feel quite comfortable here in my NMRX studio. Daz even set up Wifi for us.
Yeah.
At NMRX, I am kind of responsible for the scheduling. So I always put at the bottom of my email, host, scheduler. So if you are willing to give a clinic, you know where to come to. And we probably schedule clinics out within the next 3 months. And we still have slots open for February and March, not knowing when this is going live, but contact me anyway.
Yep. Probably in the next month or so this will go out. So probably late January, I think, will be I might grab your email later and we'll sort that out, and I'll put that link below. So if people want to reach out to you, we'll go from there. So, also read somewhere recently, you do yourself a lot of clinics. Obviously, we're probably talking pre-COVID here. You've some have done hundreds. You're prepared to drive up to 400 or 500 miles on occasions, and you'll do clinics from JMRI operations, what we call soldering here in Australia, not soldering, as Lionel Strain gets stuck into us Australians, but. So tell us a little bit more about your clinics and that side of things to sort of get us to know sort of what you're all about.
Well, we have to preface the giving clinics. It's going to cost you an operating session. So, So for an operating session, I'm willing to drive to places. So anything technology-wise, anything even from soldering, willing to teach people how to solder, how to open up an Arduino out of a box, how to change the blinking light to something that blinks a little faster. Make a traffic light, make a camp welder, do a little fireplace, JMRI, how to set it up for operations, how to get your turnouts to move, all those kind of things that, kind of people think it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Well, we go the step-by-step way to show you introduction to electronics.
Yeah, sure. And also I see you're the treasurer of the Lone Star division of the NMRA in the United States. So shameless plug. So away you go if you want to push the Lone Star.
Well, it's the place to be, right? Hot in the summer and not so hot in the winter, but no snow.
A bit like Adelaide then, like South Australia anyway. Definitely no snow, just dreary and cold. But so lovely.
We moved here from Boston as soon as we could. Literally.
Yeah, okay. That's northeast, isn't it? So they'd be very cold right now. So, okay. So how long you been sort of involved with the Lone Star? As obviously 3 years as treasurer, 3 terms as treasurer.
when I moved from New England down here, within the first year, I was involved in the local division. So that would have been now 10 years already.
Wow.
Amazing how time flies. So
Yeah. So, Speed, obviously you go by another first name, which I promised I'm not going to mention here, but you said you'd give us the backstory. I like Speed Muller. I think that's got a certain sort of edge to it. So what's the little backstory to that?
So I was born in Southern Africa as Gert Johannes Muller.
Yeah.
But in America, they shorten Gertrude into Gert, so all my junk mail shows up with an MS or an MRS in front of it.
Right.
Nah, not my kind of thing.
Yeah.
So when I moved to Texas, I helped a guy that I never met before on his SK layout with JMRI.
Yeah.
And what I didn't know is that you're not allowed to touch the computer because the dispatcher is the only guy that touches the computer. So by the time I had 3 lines coded in there was a crowd of people behind me, and he tapped me on my shoulder and they said, I can understand that your name is a problem here, but you can type faster than we can read. We're going to call you Speed. So the crowd took that as the introduction of, hey, say hi to Speed.
Yeah.
And it stuck. So
that's fantastic. I like that. But from Speed from now on, so that's what I've been told to call you by I think it was Gordy said to that. Make sure you call him by Speed, and I will honour that. So that's a great little story. So thanks for that, Speed.
Thank you.
So history. I'd like to know people's history in the hobby. So sort of where you've come from to where you are now. So if you could sort of tell us about that a little bit.
Well, so in Southern Africa, we had these things called sanctions, and not sure how, by hook or crook, we always got the products from Lima, that was in Italy, and they would make things like the Blue Train and the locomotives and cars that go in and out of Cape Town. So as a 6-year-old, you get a present like that under the Christmas tree. Mine was a little harder than that because we didn't have electricity. We would only have a generator for an hour a night. And if you're in boarding school, then you don't have any trains or toys there either. So only on weekends, you get 2 hours, Saturday night and Sunday night. So that's how mine started. Went to college in South Africa. Trains kind of stayed at home. We built a new house on the ranch. So I got a big room in the old house, built a big layout there with now the pantographs, because everybody knows that the Blue Train is an electric train. And so I spent probably most of my life in model railroading, building pantographs and making trains run off overhead wires. So after college, moved to Boston, and then I realized that there's no basement big enough here for pantographs. So I switched to N-scale and decided that maybe it's time to model the railroad in my native country now that went from Southwest Africa to Namibia. And the Transnamib is a government-owned company. So I didn't really want to go onto Facebook and post things about something else that's owned and operated by another government, because if you say something bad, you want to fly home and get waterboarded by the authorities where water is a scarce resource. So I called it the TX Namib, because all electronic engineers and embedded software guys know that transmit is TX, so TX Namib it was. And then 10 years later, we moved to Texas. So glad that I picked the TX and not the RX.
Nicely. Okay. That's what I honestly thought. That's where the TX came from. Obviously, the shortened down version of the state that you live in. So that's great. So N-scale, more out of necessity, because you didn't have obviously the size of space that you would to do a pantograph, as you were saying. So what's the name of your current layout that you're building? And tell us a little bit about that.
It's a TX Namib now, and it's in a room that was added to the home before we moved in, on top of a 2-car garage. So I have 20 by 20 feet plus the entrance in the hallway. I see there's some pictures coming by us as we're talking. So there's some photos of the entrance as well as the room. And it's a 2-deck layout. So I'm sitting inside the helix, which is a 4x8 plywood sheet cut with a hole in the middle. And I always wanted the dispatcher to sit here. So in front of me are 2 monitors. But we are fortunate enough now with today's technology that we're actually using remote dispatchers just like the real railroads do. So single main line everywhere except for in the helix, because it takes the longest to go between these two towns at the top and the bottom. So I thought, in order to save you some 12 minutes waiting for another guy coming down, how about we get you going on the other main line, like in Southern Africa, left hand running, or probably Australia too, right?
Correct. Yep.
So everywhere you split somewhere on the siding, you take the left side.
Yep.
Enough staging on both ends of the railroad so that we can park 16 trains in Walvis Bay and 24 trains in Windhoek, in case we get a guest operator that just wants to run a train through the layout.
Sure.
But it's built and designed for operations, and therefore the scenery is coming a little later. Like Taz asked for some pictures and things, and I was like, well, this is going to be a dry interview if there's no pictures of scenery. So most of the scenery that you see in the slides coming by were actually done by friends of mine. It's not my handiwork. It's their skills that I'm using.
Sure. So, what's DCC system? What are you looking at?
I'm using NCE. When I moved to Boston, I did a thorough search of all the various systems out there.
Sure.
And I really did not want to memorize pound 45 #/-sign. When I picked up an NCE system and I could read the English, I was like, even though this is my second language, I'll go with this one.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
So
I sort of gathered it was NCE because what's the BD20s that you're using for occupancy detection. So
yes,
and that's inherent to obviously NCE, so which is great. So obviously you've touched on JMRI a little bit. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here. So obviously the layout is purely built for operations in mind. So we'll talk about the virtual and the remote operations, which is something you're quite heavily into as well, as my understanding. So take the COVID rubbish out of it. What does a typical operations session look like pre-March of this year? So how many operators and how do you go about running your trains? And
so the operation started beginning of November last year, because Houston, the DFW area, and Tulsa has a 3-year rotation. And I realized that if you don't sign up for one of these events to host, then you might not get something done. So last April, I decided that this November is going to be the chance to invite people over. And I literally slept 4 hours a night until November the 2nd. So quite a feat to get something to move turnouts every time you press the button to move the turnouts and make trains go places. Now, there's still problems with derailments and curved turnouts, so we're still working on those. So an operating session here starts with 2 people in the yard and then 2 freight trains run by 2 other people. And then halfway in the session, those 2 guys show up at one of these yards, and they replace the yard master or yard guy who then build their own trains and then run out as freight trains. Sure. So we don't have to do the pick a short straw and who's going to be the yard guy. You are going to be a yard guy. So so that was the initial design. There's about 3 or 4 towns and industrial areas that we have not completed yet. So I could eventually have maybe up to 8 operators. Wow. And then we also have the staging yards that's not in use yet, where we run trains, from outside the layout, coming from South Africa to a place on the layout where you can then either drop the train or do some work. Sure. So it was planned to, maybe maximum 8 guys and then a dispatcher here in the helix to control the system.
Yeah, lovely. So, so the method of moving the rollout or moving the trains around is JMRI operations, or is that how you're doing it? With the switch lists
I'm working on a car forwarding system where you would select your skill level when you walk in. So if you're a novice, then you will only pick up green cars with trailing point moves. And if you are a expert at this, then you would have to turn a car around in the town prior so that you could deliver it with the left door at the platform. Right. So or that whole camera system is still in development.
Yeah.
And until then, for to make things run and test out turnouts and things, I have a computer typed switch list, which basically tells you what car to pick up where, and in the same line where you have to deliver it. Right. So it is one of those brain teasers where you show up at a town and it says -3 because you have to drop 3 cars, but it doesn't tell you which 3 because earlier up in the list it showed where those cars were going. Right. But second session, then you're over that fear and you know how it works. The intent is to move away from paperwork so that the only thing in your hand is the throttle. Sure. And then you control and witness and see everything on the tablet in front of you. Right. So that you can, the tablet would know that train 101 and train 401 is in this town. So you select which train and it would show you which cars you would need to move when you show up.
Right. And that's all within JMRI, is it?
No, it's all standalone. The switch lists I give people now are all made out of Google Sheets. Oh, okay. So I just print a new set and hand them. I actually restaged the whole layout to time 0. So if you come here and you operate the same position 4 times in a row, you're going to move the same cars 4 times. Okay. All right. But by rotating you through the layout, because I know where you were last time, it's going to take you 3 or 4 months before you do the first position again.
And if there's anything like me, enough. Yeah. Sorry, I would have forgotten by then. So what was going where? So that's great. So,
but the cars do go to places where they would have gone. It's not just any box car or any tank car showing up at a milk factory, right?
Yeah, sure.
The appropriate cars are moved to locations.
Yeah, excellent. So your each one of your industries, when your operators or your conductors are switching, what we're calling switching or switching, I think your part of the world, wagons out, is there a physical control panel there, or are you doing sort of like a remote type control panel through the web server on JMRI?
So everything can be remotely controlled, but every town has its own little Android tablet that is looking at a website that's running on a Raspberry Pi. Right. So we're actually not using JMRI to control the turnouts because the JavaScript code is sending out what we call MQTT messages. Right. Well, not what we call. MQTT is a established protocol out there, but we're using that to talk to little Wi-Fi boards that I think is up in the picture right now to move turnouts.
I was actually coming up a little bit in the next 20 minutes or so. I was actually going to chat to you about your signaling system that you've done like that. I just stumbled across this morning when I was in your website, and I thought that's someone. I think it was Gordy did mention it. No, it was Martin Jenkins mentioned it. That he said that was rather a large rabbit hole for him to turn around and say that's a large rabbit hole to go down. It's
Well, I can show you how to do it for $1.50.
Wow, that's fantastic. So virtual and remote operations, well, obviously they're one and the same, is my understanding. So what are you doing within that space? Obviously, we got best case scenario pre-COVID. You started operations in November. What's my understanding? You're a bit of a leader in this sort of space, sort of between you, David Aberles, and that sort of vein. So how you're operating your layouts?
I don't know about the leader part, but we at least have the dispatcher completely remote now, and we are setting the cameras up so that you could also run the trains and slow them down and stop them in places. Now, what I always tell people is that operations is half the time you pick up cars and half the time you set out cars. Now, we all know that if you can back into a car and see it on a camera and change the throttle to forward, then that car is hooked, right? You just picked it up. Yeah. So if it's always the front car and there's nothing behind it, then you don't have to uncouple anything. So we can literally run through the whole layout and pick up cars without needing a switchman or a dispatcher that needs to put his steel toe boots on and climb out of the train, right?
Yeah, sure.
So the hard part will be to get cars to uncouple. So if you want to set out a car, or you have to swap 2 cars. Yeah. And I think the understanding right now is that if you're not in HO or maybe S or O scale where you can have electronic uncouplers in every car, then that will be a little harder. Now, on my layout, I prefer that nobody touches anything except the throttle or the tablet to control things, because I'm using magnets underneath the cars to uncouple there.
Sure.
And
sure.
some days it works really, really good, and some days it just doesn't work at all.
Yeah,
so
I feel your pain there.
yeah.
Definitely feel your pain. So, in regards to the CCTV that you're using, so you're looking at, there seems to be 3 schools of thought. So I've seen sort of the guys and girls at the Silicon Valley lines over in LA, I think it is, over in the West Coast, far West Coast. They're sort of doing
closer to San Francisco, I believe.
San Francisco. So, so they seem to be doing sort of camera cars, so a flatbed wagon that's getting pushed around by the locomotive, or a dummy sort of locomotive. And then
Correct.
Marty is obviously looking at cameras of rail fanning sort of type areas. So, and then following trains more around within JMRI, or whatever's tracking your occupancy, or a mixture of the both. So where's your layout sitting within that scope?
So with my cameras monitoring the cars, cameras next to the track that's reading the cars as they come by,
Right.
and cameras in the ceiling to track where that white roofed car is going all through the town.
Yep.
I would have it, at least that part already done, where you can monitor it from afar.
Sure.
In N-scale, it's a little harder to do the camera on the car.
Sure.
But there are these little spy cameras that, here's a vision of one of them. We just have to find a way to, instead of this going to your phone, make it go to a computer screen,
sure.
or a web browser, and then you can see that too.
Yep.
Me and Brad were just discussing that this morning, where the question is quality versus what's the word? Do you want the nicest picture, or do you want the fastest picture?
Sure.
So some people want to see the scenery as they ride their train through the layout.
Yep.
So you need really good quality. But if you are operating the engine back and forth and need to stop it, then you need the frames to show up quicker, so that you have a feeling of how it moves. A beautiful picture every 10 seconds is not
good enough.
sufficient to run a train.
Yeah, sure.
So mixture of both, to answer the
mixture of both. Yeah,
question.
It seems to be what I'm gonna. I run a program called Train Controller, which is the German brand. So that's what I use to run through web servers. I've only just sort of started touching the surface with the whole remote operation side of things. Yeah. I have sorted out a way that I can, because I run a bit similar to you. They're all web browsers. I don't have any control panels. They're all sort of soft control panels, no wiring to them. They're just a PC that sits on my local area network. I have worked out a way how we use the WAN side of things, so I can access my layouts computer from the outside world, so to speak. So that's sort of where I'm at. I'm just starting to dabble around with some ESP32s, which young Marty got me into. So, and I've also tried the Raspberry Pis as well. So, sort of which way I'm going to go with those, I'm not sure at this point. So,
the benefit of the MQTT system is that you add an external bridge to any other MQTT broker or server in the world, and then all those commands for changing turnouts and signals and picking up trains is automatically broadcasted to another server. So if you bring up the same web page on your computer, like the image show now, then you can control the same turnouts than I can on the inside here.
Okay. Right. Okay.
So
excellent. So obviously Arduino is another sort of passion of yours, I would say. So besides the ESP32 cams where you sort of dabble in Arduino, I think is it IDE, which you flash the drives that way. I'm not very au fait with what you can actually do with Arduino. I'm just sort of scratching the surface with what can be done. Just very, very beginner. So sort of in layman's terms, for someone like myself who has no idea about it, what sort of things are you looking at with Arduino, sort of maybe for the beginner to sink their teeth into it?
So there's all the flashing light things. There's all the record the light level. There is all the temperature sensing or occupancy sensing or anything that you want to monitor. You could do with a little Arduino, which is just a tiny little microprocessor
Sure.
that probably runs some 8-bit code. And what made this a worldwide thing is that the people who invented this intended it for people in the show business, like when you walk down the I don't know what you call those tables that you walk on at a fashion show, to have your wings with little LEDs on it.
Okay.
You know, so that those people can write a few lines of code and have blinking LEDs. So that's the simple thing. The unfortunate truth is that it is just C and C++ code. So if you really want to have some fun with it, then go to the library and get a book on, big Introduction to C or Introduction to C++, and that will bring you a lot further than what you expected. We in any Arduino clinic that I teach the beginners, the first thing you do is you make sure that the software is installed, and then the device driver is installed when you plug it in, so you get a COM port. And then you'll notice that the Arduino starts blinking, and that's by default. The application that's already loaded. So the first thing we do is we change how it blinks. Is it on for 2 seconds and then off for a second, or is it on for a quarter second and on for 2 seconds? Whichever way. And then we do the high five that once you uploaded that change in the code you did, you are now officially an embedded programmer. Well, not really, but you did program an embedded system. So, and then when we go to the advanced class, we have to convince people that that the delay function is preventing you from using all 15 pins to do separate things. Because if you delay one LED by a second, then all the others are also delayed. So you have to switch over to a polling thing where you say, is it time to change the LED? And that's easy with the millis function. Or you got to go hardcore and do the interrupt-based thing where the timer expired and it's time to change the traffic light for your automobiles from a red to a yellow.
Yeah, sure.
So, but little grade crossing lights, even with sound, because me and a friend, he's in one of the photos here, we took someone's interrupt-driven C program and we switched it over to the sketch world that the Arduino IDE gives you, and you can now plug a speaker in and it PWM that speaker with the ding 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 as the servos bring the grade crossing down. So
unbelievable.
Amazing what we can do. Unfortunately, only 99% of the people that uses an Arduino would not write a line of code. So we have to keep that in mind, that we don't teach everybody how to do Arduino if they have no intention on writing C programs. But you got to keep them interested and show them how to upload programs so that they at least can find a use for it. And then you also have to keep the 1% happy, because they are the guys that's going to write the code.
That's right.
For other people to use.
So what do? You a programmer by trade? Is that how you've learned all this, or it's just something that you literally did go to the library and started reading these books and taught yourself?
So I'm a electronic engineer by degree, and I always tell people that if you go to a Southern African university, they don't teach you English writing or some language art or some history. You only taught science, math, and engineering. And that includes programming. So if you graduate as an electronic engineer, you can write assembly code and C code and probably Pascal and some Java as well. So that's where I picked it up. And when I went to Boston, I enrolled in a master's degree program for software engineering. So that came at the same time when the internet exploded. And someone said, remember that when you do your master's degree thesis, pick a topic that is something in your interest. So, I could have wrote an application that runs on a server to do like an Amazon app where you buy something and you check out your cart and it calculates the tax and the shipping. So I decided, I'm going to take the advice and make my thesis about the use of RFID underneath tiny N-scale little cars. So That's how I stayed in the software world. When
Yeah.
moving to Texas, my job changed a little bit from just electronic engineering to system engineering, where you have to worry about the whole system and make sure that all the parts come together. So
Yeah, sure.
So
Are you looking at? I'm just interesting. You bring up RFID because it's something I did touch on for a little bit. A number of years ago now. Not from the code, so that was my introduction to Arduino, I think, from memory. So are you looking at running RFID on your layout to keep tabs of your wagons as you wrote your thesis on? Is that, or you're not going to go
No,
that far with it?
no, not anymore, because in N scale we need weight in the cars,
Yep.
right? So there's a metal piece that's sitting on top of underneath your flat car,
Sure.
and now where do you put the tag?
Yeah, sure.
Well, they make these tiny little tags that they, I guess, implant in animals and things, and they're a tiny little bead that sits long ways under your skin.
Yeah.
But in order to match up with the reader that sits horizontal underneath your railroad track, you need to have the bead point down.
Downwards. Okay. Yeah.
And how do you take a 6 millimeter long bead and point it down on a flat car in N scale? So that's kind of limiting.
Yep.
And it's not inexpensive. It's not a cheap part of the thing.
Yeah.
The tags themselves are fairly inexpensive. If you buy 10,000, then they a couple of pennies.
Yeah.
But you also need the readers.
Yeah.
And you have to integrate all the readers into something else that sends the data to a computer.
Correct.
And I found that a reader only tells you that the car is there. It doesn't tell you which way it went.
Yeah.
So if a car is red at the entrance of a yard, you still don't know if it came or go. So you have to read it again some other time.
Yeah.
But if you're using a camera system, you take 2 photos a second apart, and you know exactly which way the car went.
Right. Okay.
Because the second photo shows the car went to the right.
Yeah. Sure.
So
that's very interesting.
So that,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, as I said, I sort of abandoned it purely on the back of you had to buy. There are a lot of the as you point out, 10,000 of the little beads to for a few hundred wagons. So from my point of view in Australia, it was a little bit cost prohibitive, and I sort of went down another rabbit hole. So I sort of left it there. I only ever bought, I think, one of the sensors, and sort of left it at that. So interesting. So
the inexpensive systems also runs in the hundreds of kilohertz, and that also interferes with, or DCC also interferes with that. So you have to prevent current from flowing over the sensor, otherwise you just get these random readings. So you got to cut the track on both rails right above the sensor, so there's no current flowing over it. You only have that problem when the engine comes over, but I don't care what the engine's number is. I care about all the cars that's behind it. So
sure.
If you would have a lighted passenger car, then you would get current flowing over it.
Yeah.
So there's also that part that you need to worry about.
I never even considered that. As I said, I never got that far with it, but I sort of left it there in the bottom of the rabbit hole, as Marty says. So obviously we're going to go sort of the next, not the next stage. This is probably more high end Arduino coding, I would think, by what we're going to go through here. So we spoke about this before. This is obviously not something on your layout, and it's not something you've designed, but you've done the Arduino code for it. So can we just obviously acknowledge the gentleman whose model this is, and when we talk about it? So
you're talking about the Molson Beer Brewery?
Correct.
And
the Molson Beer Brewery,
So that is Lloyd Hensch's layout in St. Eugene, Canada. And he decided to have a little complicated door opening system, so that when someone brings a car to be delivered to the beer brewery, that then we had this whole plan to have it elaborate, where you detect if a train is coming in on which track, and then it would show you a flashing red light to say we're calling the attendant, and then the supervisor, and then he would give permission, and then the light would maybe change color, or the door would open up, and then it would go from red to green.
Yep. Sure.
And I think you have a video of it.
I do. Yep. I'll just quickly put that up. So let me get that sorted. So it actually, people won't be able to hear the sound, but it's actually making like a little horn sound as that right-hand door's going up. So, and then obviously it turns green. So
green light when it's up, and when it goes down, it's making a different kind of sound. There's also a big switch if you want to turn the sound on and off and don't want to be bothered by it. And I kept telling him he's got to close the door because there's going to be beer bottles rolling out there if he leaves it like that. But
that's right. That's right.
Just tongue in the cheek. So, so we actually also made a panel which you can press the buttons on, and you will not be able to open 2 doors at a time. That photo there shows the servos on the inside pulling the string. And for safety, when the system turns on, we make all the doors open up. So when you turn the layout on in the beginning of the night, you have to go close all the doors. And not any door, not 2 doors can be open at a time, but except for in the beginning of the night, they will all be open so that you don't trap a car or slam the door shut on top of equipment. So
okay. All right.
So we'll have,
and that's all Arduino running all of that, including the sound and the automation.
Single Arduino with a PCA 9685 PWM driver servo board, because he has 6 servos running, as well as 6 sets of LEDs, 6 buttons, and the only thing that you shouldn't do is plug a higher voltage power supply into the system than you should. So we are currently waiting for new parts to show up, because like we all claim as electronic engineers, these things work with smoke. If you let the smoke out, then they don't work anymore.
I've done that to a few decoders in my time. Don't you worry about that. So well-versed, well, I wouldn't say well-versed in it, but it has happened, and very, very annoying. And obviously DCC Decoder gets very expensive. So
keep the smoke on the inside.
Correct. Even on a steam locomotive, even though it's meant to come out, it's a different part of the locomotive. The smoke came out of mine. It came out of the tender, which is very unusual. Yeah. But anyway, so we digress. So, all right. So we've had a look at the Paulsons. So how long? This is probably how long is a piece of string question, but excuse my ignorance. But the coding for the brewery. So how long would that sort of take you to write something like that? From concept to sort of getting the way you want it to operate, I suppose.
Okay, so you had a little bubble diagram slide through the somewhere in the photos.
Yeah.
If that bubble diagram is done, meaning you know what you want, then we can write this code in a night.
Right.
So 4 hours work is done. But if you change your mind halfway, then it's a new 4 hours, right? So so you gotta get the requirements in and the bubble diagrams out. And unfortunately, in a hobby where you just teach people Arduino, they don't realize that this is still a system, right? You should still apply the normal system design things, like what is the mechanical parts going to do? What is the light parts going to do? What is the sound parts going to do? And when are they going to do that?
Right.
Because if you just start writing 200 lines of code and then you change your mind, well, you might have to delete 80 of those lines now because you put them in the wrong spot at the wrong, for doing something at the wrong time. So
sure.
So we're trying to get people to also learn about system engineering and follow their request for doing things in that same fashion.
So quite often, I'm assuming you're speaking from experience. Someone has they want to say I want from to go from A to B, but then halfway through your coding, they're adding another C and E and F. That would get rather annoying. So that's fine. So another little rabbit hole I see that you've gone down, and we spoke about it briefly before, and you've explained it a little bit more to me. Let me scale this photo a little bit. For some reason, it's all blown out. Okay, so you talked about the MQTT and sort of how your signaling works. So can you sort of explain a little more in depth, sort of, obviously we've got the diagram up there, so how it sort of, I'm assuming this is a bit like your bubble diagram, but a sort of a smaller version of it that you were talking about before. So if it starts with JMRI, you make the masts, and then from there you design the infrastructure or the hardware around that, or the software. So can you sort of tell us about that a bit?
Okay, so this diagram was made when JMRI did not have MQTT yet. So we had to write Python code to facilitate that, and that would be the third block at the bottom left that says listeners. So that is now about to disappear because JMRI now supports turnouts, lights, and sensors, and we are very sure that the next edition will have signals for us as well.
Sure.
But it's very easy in JMRI to create any virtual anything, a virtual turnout, a virtual sensor, or a virtual signal, and then you can write a few lines of code to say, if that signal changes aspect or if that head changes color, then run this piece of code. And since the Python or the Jython inside JMRI has access to all the Python things in the world too, you can email your grandma when the Wilson Brewery door opens up. Yeah. You can send a text message to someone else when two turnouts are in the crossover position. So you literally have the sky is the limit for doing things. Right. So in this diagram here, you need a router wirelessly, or you could have Arduinos with networking shields on top of them, and then it's all wired. So it doesn't necessarily have to be wireless. It's just the benefit with the wireless is that you could use these ESP8266 devices, and they cost $1.50 now. So
that's them there in that photo, is it?
Yep. Like you showed there.
Sure.
So so in that diagram, then it shows that every signal in that case has its own little ESP8266, which you use the same Arduino IDE to write the code for it and program them. And the MQTT in the old days was called a broker. After version 3.11, it's now a server. Imagine it's like an email server, but it only has one email for every email address. So every topic only has one message in it. And when you put a new message in a topic, then it replaces it. So it would be nice if we all had just one message in our inboxes, right? So every little ESP subscribe to either one or more email addresses or MQTT topics. And when you put for topic 01, you put stop in there, or you put clear in there, or you put approach in there, then that little, like you show there, then that signal mask would then show the appropriate stop or clear mask to you. Now, right here by my left shoulder, we have a BNO/PENSI signal, and it has the three lights that show stop like this, the three lights for approach, and the three lights for clear. The code on the ESP or the code on the Arduino is making that decision on what LEDs are on at the time when it gets this message. So it's not just JMRI that says stop, clear, or approach, or dark, or medium approach, and all of the other 200 ones. You also need to have some code where you say which heads are on and what color at the time. These guys above my shoulder here are those NeoPixel lights, and they could go any one of, I think, 16 million colors. The good news is you don't need 16 million colors. You just need dark, and you need lunar, and yellow, and red, and green. And sometimes they should be flashing. So that's how simple the system is. In a few words, it's literally a wireless router that can easily talk to 20 of these devices. And if you buy a little bit more expensive router, then you can talk to 200 or 500 of these devices. And now you can tell things to act. Like all my servo controllers, which is the little board that sits underneath way up there. There's a version of it right here in the camera. So I can control 16 servos from JMRI or from my panels, and that little ESP board is simply listening to a thrown or a closed.
Right.
Of course, when the system turns on, they go to the safe position, which is called middle, so that you're not pushing something the wrong way because you left a car or an engine on it. And then as soon as it makes a Wi-Fi connection and then a subsequent connection to the MQTT server, then it remember from last night that you left it in the throne position, and then it would go from middle back to throne.
Right.
So you also solve what they call the start of day problem, where the MQTT server is remembering where everything was last night.
Sure.
So all your signals that was green would go back to green. This little thing here, if I reset it, it will actually do a flashing thing, and it actually makes a purple and a blue. And that way it tells you that, hey, we're rebooting. And if you don't get an MQTT connection, then one of the lights will flash purple. And you would go, oh, that's a weird color for a PENSI signal to flash purple. But it's not a PENSI signal yet. It's still trying to connect to the system. So we build all these tiny little things to help the user to get there.
Yeah, sure. So the signaling system has one router just for the signaling and one you running your turnouts with it as well? Is that how it works, or is it just one?
It's the same router that you use for your Raspberry Pi or your JMRI to download uploads, to download upgrades. Yeah. It's the same router that you use for your Wii throttle to control your trains with. Okay. It would be the same router that sends out your ESP cam stuff out. Sure. It's a very low data rate system where I don't know if you can see these signals change colors, but it's one message a second. So it's a few bytes that pops out. Yeah. Okay. Only when you make something change. So yeah.
So then obviously that signal head then communicates back to, is that what sits in JMRI, or that sits in the other program that you're using to show the operators, say to show your dispatcher, I suppose, is where I'm going with it. So
JMRI is just saying signal mass number 4, go medium approach. Okay. Yep. So it's just JMRI is just outputting, and that signal is subscribing to that topic. So when the topic changes, it gets a new one. And not when it changes, when it gets loaded, even with the same value, it then gets the message and it acts appropriately. So it doesn't have to talk back. There's no need for it to. Sure. We do make them talk back so that we can see that it's alive and it's listening. Yeah. But we ignore all that information. It's for the debugging side where you want to know that the turnout has thrown. So JMRI does have stuff built in so that you could put sensors in, so the turnout could report back and say, I have been thrown. I have a sensor that matches that. So we are actually thrown. So.
Okay. Is that something that you do, or you haven't gone that far with it, I suppose?
Well, because I'm not using JMRI on the layout, I don't need any of that. So
yeah, okay. Right. That's fascinating. So obviously that would limit the amount of physical wiring to that area as well, I would think. But obviously what you're not wiring, you're adding code to something else. So it's all, I suppose it's time-wise.
So that you're touching my subject of the 3-foot problem. Yeah. I claim that when there is a problem on your layout, you should be standing anywhere within 3 feet of it and be able to solve it. Find it, fix the problem, and deal with it. Yeah. This whole thing where we need to crawl underneath and follow miles and miles and miles of, let's say, scale miles of wiring to go find a problem is now gone. Our sensor software can do 96 sensors, and if you say 96 sensors or 96 turnouts in a 3-foot or even a 6-foot radius, that's 100 turnouts in a 3-foot radius is a lot of turnouts. I mean, you're building something fancy. Yeah. So no need for that. The unfortunate problem with these new pixels are that with one pin on Arduino, you can change a 250 pixels to different colors. Now, most people do not have 250 heads on their layout, but you could do that with one Arduino pin. So you're back to this wire continues for 200 scale miles again. Yeah. but at least you know when a signal does not change color, it just stays off.
Yeah.
When you turn the system on, you know the last working one and you know the next non-working one, so you know where the problem is.
Sure.
You just need to remember in your layout, how did the wire run? Now, I would not recommend people doing that, but for 10 or 15 signal heads, you could run the wires as long as you want, but no need to put them all on one pin.
Yeah.
So
Fascinating.
Shameless plug, this whole system that me and two friends, one of them, David McMorran in Australia, I believe he lives in Melbourne, and Joel Davidson in Austin, Texas, is called MQ Trains. And we're about to release the software open source to everybody. And at mqtrains.com, we will announce that. We're just dealing with all the user documentation and the guides, how to set it up, which, I had this up and running 4 years ago. And then last year, we got all the turnouts working. And it's been taking us more than 9 months to make sure that when I send you the code, or I send you an ESP, that you could get it onto your network. Because when it was just my layout, everything was just hard-coded. You connect to the SSID TX numup and the magic secret password that only I see. But when I send it to you, you don't want to change your router to match my router. So I need to give you a box where you can type that in, and also make it so that the neighbor cannot spy in on that little signal controller of yours and get to your Wi-Fi information. So that's what we've been dealing with, is the peripheral things.
Yeah, lovely. So just I will put that in the description below. So that's mqtrains or oneword.com. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep. All right. So, all right, I'll not a shameless plug at all. I'll put that up there. So that's fascinating. So for someone like myself who runs European semaphores, is that something that this can run as well? Because obviously we're running I think they run on a very not quite a servo, but they run on like a more of a solenoid, I suppose. The Weissman semaphores.
So if it's servos, it's easy. It's easy for you to specify the endpoints where the servo moves to. It is just as easy to stop it in the middle, because we know where the middle is. So we just need to enable the go middle command. And if it's a solenoid, then the I/O boards will turn things on and off. All you need to know is which solenoid needs to go in when. So,
all right. I think we're going to be communicating about this aspect. So I'm just starting off. I've got a number of sort of stationary decoder type, accessory decoders that are running it, but that can get quite expensive to run them all. So it might be something that I can look at, because I'm working with a guy out of Poland, of all places, that we're 3D printing two aspect signals for the masts for the semaphores that will use servos to run those. So that's fascinating.
So would they snap from one position to another, or would they be delayed to go smoothly?
They'd probably go, if we could do for them to go smoothly, I think, is because prototypically they sort of, if it comes from a sort of a horizontal position, which is stop to a go, just for, say, what we call a home signal, it'll sort of bounce a little bit as well, is what they've got into it. Whether that's something that obviously you'd be able to code that into it quite easily. Well, not easily, but you'd be able to do that, I would think. But yeah.
Cool.
So
that'd be something neat. Maybe we can recruit you for NMRX to give us a clinic on that.
Well, we're still trying to get the well, I would do a clinic, yes. We're just getting the 3D print right. That's taken us, we're about on our 5th version of it, I think, because some of the arms are breaking because they're just so fine with so this is a resin printer I'm using. So we're just trying to get those bits right, and then I'll then try to work out the servo side of things, just very, very antiquated, just like an on and off switch type thing, to get them moving, and then obviously then eventuate. That'd be something very interesting to getting into that.
Cool.
So, well, Speed, thank you so much for chatting with me your evening over there, and it's just ticked over lunchtime over my neck of the woods. So fascinating, the electronic side of things. Your mind is a little bit like David Barraza. If you've sort of dealt with that gentleman as well, he's not into obviously into different types of things, but his wiring is it's quite interesting. Sorry, go on.
I believe he's an LCC expert. So
he is an LCC expert. So it's very interesting. You're going wireless. Everything's wired for him. So obviously it's quite interesting, polar opposites, but sort of doing very similar things, I suppose, in some regards. Well, so it's been fascinating. So thank you so much for coming and chatting with me tonight.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Make sure you subscribe, click that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos. Support us on Patreon, like us on Facebook and Instagram at Model Railroad Technique.